I'm just gonna kick things off. So first of all, hello everyone. My name is Sarah Giaquinto, and I am a student intern here at the Office of Community Engagement, and I will also be the virtual leader for this workshop today. And I just want to take a moment to thank you all for participating in Good Neighbor Day this year. This is a very special event because originally it was planned for April, but then as we know, the pandemic happened and is still occurring, so we had to adapt, and now we are taking on this hybrid format today. So some of you may have participated in an in-person project somewhere around College Park, and others of you may just be doing these virtual workshops. But no matter what your role is today, we're so happy that you're here and excited to get started. I'm gonna wait a couple more minutes because there's a brief introductory video that I want to show you all, just introducing the event and welcoming you once again. But I'm having some technical difficulties on my side, so I'm just waiting for my supervisor to come in and he will share the video with all of you. And then after that, we'll begin this Zero Hunger workshop. I'm very excited. There's a great turnout for this, as I'm sure all of you see. This was definitely one of our most popular workshops as people were signing up. So I'm very excited. Before we start, does anyone have any questions? And also feel free to use the chat throughout the workshop if you have any questions or comments or anything like that. And also if you have any, if there's any Zoom issues, which I'm hoping there won't be, but if there is, feel free to say something about that as well, and I will do my best to address that. Awesome. All right, so like I said, so sorry for the waiting. Just a couple more minutes. Actually, in the meantime, I'll start by introducing the people who are going to be leading this Zero Hunger workshop today. So I'd like to pass it over to Ayanna Chambers, and she'll introduce herself.
Okay, hi everyone. My name's Ayanna. I am a sophomore at UMD, so I'm a student just like you guys. I'm the co-coordinator for Zero Hunger alongside Buckley, who's also going to be helping us present today. And we just hope that we can shed some light on this very important issue and maybe like encourage you guys to volunteer to help out with food insecurity. So I'll let Buckley introduce himself if he'd like to.
So hi everyone, my name is Buckley Sake. I'm also a student at the University of Maryland in the School of Agriculture. And I'm also co-running the Zero Hunger campaign with Ayanna for Maryland, for the University of Maryland, yes. And I'm excited to be here, and thank you to everyone for coming.
So Zero Hunger is under a campaign under Maryburg, which is a student advocacy group on campus. And Zero Hunger, a lot of what we're doing this semester is education and advocacy for food insecure individuals. Usually we like to conduct a lot of food drives and we like to do a lot of hands-on volunteering work, but obviously the pandemic has kind of switched what we're able to do. So we've been trying to work around that and doing a lot of virtual events, such as like workshops like this. We've done this. We're also working on like doing a virtual fundraiser for the campus pantry. So a lot of the work we do is just around awareness and around the issue. What else? If you're interested in joining Zero Hunger, like we'll have our email at the end of the presentation, so you can like email us and then Buckley or I will respond. We also have our meetings Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. via Zoom, and we're on Instagram too. So if you ever like want to check us out, you can go on there, and we're pretty responsive. So yeah.
Yeah, and then just a little more on the campaign. So the way we run is that we try to do less of, the savior complex of, imposing in terms of what people need, but more of communal outreach. So listening to what people need in their communities in terms of food, and then engaging, students or anyone who'd like to be on the campaign to really achieve our mission statement, which currently is destigmatizing food insecurity and connecting students and resources. And those are sort of like the two main entry points of our campaign, in the sense that food insecurity has a lot of stigma surrounding it, whether that be people thinking that people are failures because they're hungry, or food insecure people are feeling some type of way about seeking out those resources. So one of our two biggest goals right now is to make sure that we create that community of caring where we really address the stigma surrounding the issue. And yeah, the resources. Another issue we'll talk about is that a lot of food insecure people and non-food insecure people don't know about what we call underutilized resources. So like a campus pantry or a soup kitchen. So our campaign also tries to engage people that way by making, resource lists and really trying to gauge what organizations or locations are, around us in terms of providing resources.
Awesome, thank you for that. And I was thinking also maybe if you'd like, you can put your email in the chat so that if people, I know you said it's at the end of your presentation as well, but maybe just so people can copy and paste that.
Sure, I'll put that in right now.
All right, I should have given everyone roughly enough time to watch the video, hopefully. And if that's all set, then I'd like to get started with the workshop. So take it away.
Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Okay. All right, so this workshop is going to be focused on how to be an ally to food insecure peers. And as we had mentioned earlier, this is presented by Zero Hunger, myself, and Buckley. So in today, we're going to be defining food insecurity and discussing its effects in our community and on our college campus. We're going to provide the tools to recognize food insecurity in peers. We're going to demonstrate how to be an ally, and we're going to connect you with community resources. Also, if there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. There will be time at the end for like a discussion and questions, but if something arises, just put it in the chat, and then Buckley or I will hopefully be able to like look and answer your question. But okay, let's get started then. So defining food insecurity.
Okay, everyone. Again, my name is Buckley Sake, and thanks to everyone for coming. So before I begin, I just put a brief description of who we are for those who are not familiar with us in the chat. Yeah, below. But so food insecurity is unfortunately sort of like a hidden issue in the sense that it's not visible. So it's not influenced by weight. It's not influenced by, exterior things, which might be, obvious. So that's the kind of nuance I want to begin with, that an overweight person or an underweight person can still be food insecure. So unlike hunger, it's circumstantial in the sense that it's one of those things which can just hit you when you're not expecting it. So the formal definition here is that food insecurity is the lack of access to nutritious food that can sustain a healthy lifestyle. Now, the key words here are access. So food insecurity is all about consistent access to nutritious food. And like I've said before, this is different from hunger. So being hungry momentarily, but it's more of like a prolonged experience. Okay, and then since food insecurity is such a quote unquote complex issue with varying degrees, so there's high food insecurity and high food security. It's a spectrum. So this table right here kind of clarifies that and kind of helps people who are food insecure or allies orient themselves. So in terms of, recognizing the issue for what it is relative to the individual or people and seeing where people fall. So at the very top, there's high food security. And this basically refers to individuals who have no problem accessing adequate food. So if you have high food security, you're someone who probably lives in a food oasis as opposed to a food desert where you can, go to the supermarket. You can basically maintain to eat a balanced diet. And then when we go down the tier, there's marginal food insecurity, food security. So this is when individuals have, slight problems and anxiety with accessing food occasionally. But then this is occasional. So this might be, 1 or 2 days out of the week. There's, issues with finding food. So that's marginal food security. And then there's low food security. This is where it gets very intense. And low food insecurity is basically when individuals have a reduced access to quality food or nutritious food. So food is, people don't know where the next meal is going to come from, and they kind of have an idea. So people are eating something when they have low food security, but access is very tough. And then we have very low food security. So this is when an individual's eating patterns are disrupted and food intake is reduced. So this is defined as the most extreme level or position to be in for a food insecure person. So this is a lot of inconsistency. If we look at students, this is a student who is probably failing classes or can't show up or keep up with assignments because they just don't know where the next meal is going to come from. Same with families as well. So that's the toughest position to be in relative to the table. So I hope that clarifies the tiers. And if anyone has a question, just stop me and ask. And here we have a video from Feeding America, which goes into the macro level scope of the issue nationally. And I hope everyone can hear it. Can people hear the video?
No.
I'm so sorry about that. I'm not sure why we've been having issues with people hearing the videos this morning. Maybe you could either send the link or explain the video.
I'll send the link.
Yeah. But I guess I can just go over the key statistics from the video or key figures. But it's basically showing us that 1 in 9 Americans are food insecure. So if you adjust that for 300 million, that's a lot of people. And I believe the statistic from Feeding America in terms of more marginalized groups, so that's like the higher statistics. So people of color, children and women, that's usually the demographics which are greatly affected by this. So again, socioeconomic status plays a huge role in this, in the sense that people with lesser income probably have a hard time, having that access to consistent and nutritious food. And that this is an issue which affects everyone. It affects community, it affects family, it affects friends. Again, it's a very undetermined and sudden issue for most of the people who face this issue, and it affects virtually everything. Like it's food survival. So for a student, again, there's a lot to do with keeping up in class and paying attention and things of that sort. So that video sort of gives everything I just mentioned, which is that scope that 1 in 9 Americans are food insecure. And that is just a prevalent issue which might not be that obvious per se. All right, so food insecurity has a huge effect on mental health. And just to cite everything we've been saying, so we have a blueprint for our campaign, or all this information we have on food insecurity, in the sense that we're working closely with our campus So her name is Dr. Wang, and she's the director of our counseling center. So between 2017 and 2018, she conducted a study on campus at UMD, a very comprehensive study, which both sampled student answers and gave students interviews. So that's sort of like our blueprint for all this research, et cetera. And she's doing more research on the issue. And I bring up that just to say, these are some of most of her findings or some of the similar things she found. And among students at UMD, one of the bigger findings was that food insecurity really affects students' mental health and education. So students who are more, who have lower food security, as we saw in that triangle and that tier, have greater mental distress, high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression, lower self-image. And then if you translate that to the classroom, then that translates to lower GPAs and higher chances of withdrawing and skipping class, because the student is not so much present in class, but thinking of, where is my next meal gonna come from? So those are some of the mental health effects. And an interesting statistic is that, you might think that there's meal plans, or friends, or jobs and working, but just to stick to the title of this presentation, which is how to become an ally. A lot of students who experienced this in Dr. Wang's study were also voicing that when these mental health effects are happening and these educational impacts are happening, it's not that easy to just be open about it and seek help or go to the pantry. Again, the stigma surrounding the issue. But it's easier to just, for the student to just curl up in a ball, quoting some of the interview answers. A lot of students just have a hard time just navigating campus or going out or asking friends for help because, again, stigma, shame, not knowing how to communicate the issue, not knowing the resources on campus. So on the surface, it's these issues, but if you go deeper, it's a really horrendous position to be in as a student. Okay, and then coping strategies. So a lot of research has been done on this issue. I believe now the national statistic is that 2 out of 5 students are food insecure. And most of the answers are usually aligned or they are similar. So if you look at coping strategies here, in terms of people experience food insecurity, 69% have to choose between food and utilities. So do I buy food or do I pay my rent? And just at first glance, these are very, very high numbers. So if you're just thinking of the person who just has to eat and has to pay rent, if your chance or your margin of making a decision is in the 60s, then it shows that times are really bad. So 67% have to choose between food and transportation. And then again, you see the options there. So the fact that people have to be in this position in the first place is what's bad, that you have to choose to either eat or go to school or pay for your medical bill. And then the 79% is the most interesting statistic to me because it talks about types of food. So when we look at health, and if we look at, I'll just keep it to America based on research, a lot of fast food in this country is very cheap. So if you look at McDonald's, the dollar menu, and a lot of healthy food. So for example, Whole Foods is very expensive. The whole organic and nutritious food, I mean, that changes if you adjust it for supermarkets. But for a lot of people, if we look at stigma surrounding weight and stigma surrounding what people eat, for some people, it's not even a choice to eat McDonald's, every day. It's that position of being food insecure and having limited resources. So that's always a fascinating statistic to me. And then one more before I go to the next slide, which is among students on campus. So college students, I think the statistic is that 40% of students with meal plans still report food insecurity. So if someone has 50 meal plans for the whole semester because that's all they can afford, then 50 meals is not really going to stretch that far for the whole semester. So those are more of like the nuances of how complex the issue can get. And then that's the statistics. So 14 million Americans are food insecure, and 1 out of 9 Americans. So this is students, children, adults. Yes. So in PG County, so Ayanna and I are in PG County right now, the University of Maryland. And then a 2017 statistic from Feeding America showed that 13.3% of residents are food insecure in PG County, and that 13.5% of children in the county are food insecure. So that's approximately 120,000 residents and 28,000 children. So whether the number is 1 or 28,000, beginning with the children, that's a very, very alarming and high number. And some of you might be asking that, okay, so what's the institutional intervention for this? What's the county doing? What's the state doing? So for Mary Perrick, we've been working with the campus pantry to sort of develop like a resource list to show, what types of food banks or food pantries or soup kitchens each county has. And for PG County, I believe, relative to other states in Maryland, the outlook was good for those resources. And in Baltimore, so Baltimore has the most resources, but it's one of those things where if you're food insecure for the whole year and there's only soup kitchens twice a week, the issue is still deep, even with state intervention. And then that's the college statistics. So this is research conducted by Dr. Wang. And it shows that 1 out of 5 college students are food insecure. So in this immediate campus at UMD, 1 out of 5 students are food insecure. And that's roughly 8,000 students. And 59% of food insecure individuals are food insecure in PG County, 59%. So this is a big issue on campus. So if I reference Dr. Wang's study here, I believe her sample size in terms of how many students she sampled was like a third of the campus. And the responses were quite similar, that for the students, that this affects my academic well-being. I have to make decisions besides between housing, etc. And so that's the college statistic. So 1 out of 5. And the national one again is 1 out of 9. Okay, and then if we look at PG County demographic data from the Capital Area Food Bank, we see that PG County has a population of over 800,000 people. And then if we look at food insecurity, that's sort of like the breakdown. So 24% of people below the age of 18, marginalized communities, if you look at non-Hispanic and African-American, 63%, that's a very high number. Females, 52%. That's a very, very high number. So the situation is pretty, again, dire, especially once you trickle down from the national statistic, 1 out of 9, to local statistics, so county statistics and college statistics. That's when it becomes more magnified and serious. All right, so thank you for listening to that. I will let Ayanna take over with more details on the issue.
Okay, great. Thank you, Buckley. And hopefully that gave a more comprehensive understanding of food insecurity and the nuance surrounding the issue. So an important part of being an ally is being able to recognize food insecurity in our peers or our family members. So according to a lot of professionals, there's 3 ways that you can identify food insecurity. And I'm going to go into those in more depth. So the 3 ways would be observing someone's physical appearance, observing one's behaviors, and then asking questions. So physical appearance, as Buckley said, there isn't a telltale sign of food insecurity by just looking at somebody, right? So a lot of times when we think of food insecurity, we think of somebody who's malnourished, you think of someone who's super skinny, maybe like the pictures of hunger that you see where somebody's like swollen belly and like their ribs poking out. But the fact of the matter is that's just not an accurate portrayal of food insecurity because it comes in many different forms. There's actually a pretty high association between obesity and food insecurity. So as we can see, it's not always going to be somebody who's super skinny who's food insecure. It could be that somebody who's a bit heavier, maybe overweight, could be food insecure. So just looking at someone's weight is not going to be a good way to determine if they are struggling with food security. However, there are some signs which can be helpful to look out for when you are trying to figure out maybe if your friend is in a bad situation. So for example, lack of energy, puffy or swollen skin, chronically cracked lips, chronically dry, itchy eyes. The last 3, these are signs of nutrient deficiencies. So again, a big part of food insecurity is that they don't have access to nutritious food. So if they don't have nutritious food, they're more likely to be nutrient deficient, and they may have these symptoms that you can be aware of. So behaviors. So as Buckley had mentioned, there are mental health effects that come with food insecurity. So a change in one's behavior or mental state could be a sign of food insecurity. So for example, excessive absences from school. So if somebody is constantly skipping school because they need to work or because they're just very tired and stressed out, they don't have the energy to go, that could be because they aren't sustaining a healthy diet, or maybe they just don't have access to the resources to sustain that healthy diet. Along with mental health, more irritability, anxiousness, or distress. This just kind of plays in with the whole they're more likely to be depressed or anxious or lonely because of their situation. An inability to concentrate, again, from Dr. Wong's study, a lot of students noted that they were so worried about when they're going to get food that they couldn't concentrate on their class. They couldn't do their homework because they're wondering, how am I going to afford dinner tonight? How am I going to, maybe feed my kids? How am I going to pay rent and eat at the same time? So these are things that weigh on someone's mind. And then frequent complaints about hunger. This one is more common in children. So kids are going to be more likely to say that they're hungry or say that, they just don't have food at home. This is something to look out for. But even in college students or adults, this is something that could be a sign that they're struggling with food security. Okay, and then asking questions. So honestly, as we saw, there aren't very clear signs to knowing if someone's food insecure. Sometimes the only way to know is if you actually ask. However, the key to asking questions is to not be invasive or inappropriate because, as Buckley noted, there's a stigma around food insecurity. So people likely don't want to be identified as food insecure, or they feel uncomfortable with the topic when approached with it. So you have to comfort them and be compassionate about the situation rather than being, confrontational. Go ahead.
Oh, apologies, sorry to interrupt. And an important thing about that is this is coming from food insecure people themselves. So when Dr. Wang conducted the study, at the very end, she had a section called research recommendations. And that's where food insecure people gave these things that, okay, I don't want to be, pushed into a box or a corner and asked and patronized, etc. So yeah, that's where that source is coming from.
Yeah, thank you, Buckley, for mentioning that, because that's very important. This is not things that we're saying is important. These are things that food insecure people are actually saying is important for us to do. So yeah, how to approach the conversation. So avoid describing the situation negatively or making the individual feel shameful, because again, there is a lot of shame surrounding the situation. So if you talk about it with a negative connotation, you're more likely to make the person feel alienated. You're more likely to make them not want to reach out for help when in actuality you're trying to get them to get help. And again, I just want to reiterate, approach the conversation with compassion. These are people, they're not, you know, statistics, which I think is hard when you look at food insecurity and look at data. You kind of reduce people to stats, but they are people going through situations that anybody can encounter. So you need to approach the conversation with kindness when you're asking these questions. A good way to start is maybe asking like, hey, is everything okay? And if the person feels comfortable, they might, you know, want to talk to you about it. If not, don't push the conversation. Again, we want to make sure that we're creating a caring community. We don't want to make people feel ashamed for their situations. Okay, so now we're going to go into some effective ways to be an ally for peers or just food insecure people in general. So the first thing that is very important is to understand the stigma. So again, there is a great sense of shame and ridicule surrounding food insecurity. So even when people think of food insecurity, again, they think of these malnourished individuals who might be like homeless, who might not even go to college because they can't afford it, but that's just not the case. Anybody in any situation can encounter food insecurity because it's very situational. Like Buckley said, like just missing rent or being laid off from work can cause you to be food insecure. So, and this stigma and this shame is something that is preventing individuals from reaching out and getting help because they feel too embarrassed to use resources when they do. Or something that Dr. Wong found is that a lot of them felt that they weren't worthy of the resources because when they think of food insecurity, they think of this very dramatic state where people again are like malnourished or homeless. So when they look at themselves, they think, oh, I'm not food insecure, I don't need these resources, or I'm not, you know, worth getting these resources. But the fact of the matter is like, yes, they are. So understanding the stigma is very important to addressing the issue. And then I have this video here again. I don't think it's gonna work, so I'm just gonna go ahead and skip this slide if it'll let me. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm just going to explain what that video was about. So essentially that was a good demonstration of stigma, and in that TED Talk, the woman described a family friend that she had who was on WIC. And if you're unfamiliar with what WIC is, it's a government assistance that helps women and children and infants. So essentially the friend was in a very bad situation. She had twins, and one of the twins had medical deformities when they were born, so they had a lot of disabilities, and medical care is, as I'm sure you all are aware of, is very expensive, especially when, you know, the woman was a single mother. She couldn't afford it, so she had to rely on government resources. And there was an instance when she was using her government resources, WIC, at the grocery store, and the cash register put on the intercom, somebody come, they're using WIC, like I need a manager. And obviously that's going to make the woman who's using the resource feel kind of alienated, because one, it's no one's business really what resources she's using or how she's paying for her baby's food and formula. And then that caused people in the grocery store to look at her funny and to, you know, kind of cast judgments on her. For example, one woman looked at her iPhone and was like, you have the new iPhone? That's interesting. Why are you on this if you have that? And it's just, those sort of judgments are just not necessary, and they're not even accurate because you just don't know what's going on in someone's situation. But it was a good display of stigma, and because of it, this woman felt really, really ashamed and embarrassed. She would go to the grocery store at night to avoid seeing people. She'd go to grocery stores far across town so people wouldn't recognize her. And those are inconveniences that someone shouldn't experience when they're already going through a tough situation. So in the video, it was reiterated that anyone can experience food insecurity. A layoff at work or a natural disaster can incite food insecurity, which is why we must change the way we think about the topic. So The next part of being an ally is addressing the stigma. And some ways to do that is to have greater public awareness about food insecurity. So for example, things like this workshop are a great way to spread awareness about food insecurity and the stigma, which plays into the next bullet point, which is increasing education on the issue. Reshape the language used when speaking about food insecurity. So again, don't use words that have a lot of negative connotations. Don't, be shameful or judgmental when speaking about food insecurity. And also don't be pitiful when speaking about food insecurity, because again, this isn't a situation that requires pity. It's a situation that just requires empathy. And there's like a big difference between those two. Be more thoughtful. So for example, if you have a friend who may be going through a bad situation, they sometimes feel really ashamed because they can't go out with their friends and get something like a slice of pizza, which isn't expensive to most, but to them that could be, a pretty big deal. So instead of asking your friend, oh, hey, let's go out to eat, maybe ask, hey, do you want to go to McKeldin Mall? Do you want to go to the library? Things that are free. So you're not alienating that person, but you're still being thoughtful about their situation. And again, greater awareness of the resources available, because something that's a big crux is that people just don't know about the resources. There are a lot of resources on our campus. There's a lot in PG County, but people don't know. And if they don't know, then they can't use it. So we really got to make sure that those resources are readily available. So again, be supportive, be compassionate, encourage the person to get help and help them find support, which kind of plays into knowing the resources and making sure that the resources are available. Don't judge or criticize people. Again, a lot of students who are going through this feel like they're failing as adults, and even adults who may not be students or who are just in the community, the PG County community in general. Don't criticize them, don't judge them, because it's something that happens to everybody, or could happen to everybody. So educate yourself and others. So greater awareness will lead to a push for institutional change. So on the side, I have some ways that you can educate yourself. You could read books, attend panels, workshops, start conversations about food insecurity, stay up to date on relevant statistics and legislation. So there's a lot of food policy, for example, SNAP benefits is always fluctuating with the policies regarding that. So understanding the changes and knowing about that is important. Education on cooking, nutrition, and financial wellness. This is a big thing that a lot of students said that they wanted, is to just know how to be more financially literate, know how to budget, know how to cook, know what nutritious food to buy when they're at the grocery store, because sometimes it's just not well known. Okay, and then advocate for change. So some things that you can advocate for are more access to food operators and facilities, more affordable or free food, more financial support or food assistance programs, more support for different backgrounds, fairer wages and workers' rights. These are all things that are very relevant to food insecurity and could be great if we could see change and could actually cause, some actual change regarding the issue, maybe lowering the statistics and lowering the amount of people who are food insecure. And then here's some ways that you can advocate. So you can sign petitions, you can speak to officials about food policy, you can encourage change at your institutions. For example, at the University of Maryland, Zero Hunger, we talk to, I know our president Grishma talks to Patty, who is on the administration, and I know Buckley has talked to her before. That's a great way to encourage change, is to talk to your higher ups and say, hey, this is an issue that we're concerned about and you should be concerned about too. Okay, and then volunteering. So you can volunteer at local food pantries and soup kitchens. I know the campus pantry has volunteering, which is a great way for you to, help the community and help the issue. You can conduct food drives and or fundraisers, volunteer at other grassroots movements, and volunteer at food recovery programs. And then that's pretty much the ways that we have listed to be an ally. And I'll hand it off to Buckley to connect you all with some resources, which is a great way to be an ally. Again, it's just knowing the resources in case you have somebody you can direct them to.
Okay, so before I continue and wrap up the presentation, someone in the chat brought to my attention a very important point about this data. So this is pre-COVID data. This is between 2017 and 2018. So I'm looking at the national statistic right now, and it says acute food insecurity has doubled since the pandemic, since COVID. So internationally, it went from 135 million people to 265 million people in just 2 months. And the number could rise here in America to more than 50 million people and 17 million children, so infants and toddlers. So the Feeding America is now, and thanks for that, Andrew, and Feeding America is now defining this as one of the most important existential issues in the country, in the sense that, you know, people are getting laid off work, people, you know, housing, people can't pay off rent given the pandemic, for various reasons. So for all the things that Ayanna just mentioned in terms of raising awareness, but most importantly, the action component, I think it's important now more than ever. And some of you might be asking that, what can I as an ally do directly right now with my resources? So there's that one-on-one type of intervention or help, in the sense that if you know a friend, like Ayanna just mentioned, you know, you want to speak to them, you want to be cognizant of, you know, how they feel about the issue and change the language and destigmatize the issue, mention resources. But I think even on a personal level, what I've been doing myself is volunteering. So I've been volunteering with, you know, campus pantries and looking at resource lists and saying, okay, so what is this area, this county, or this school missing, and how many people need help, and how can I as an ally work? I mean, if you do your part, that's already enough. I know that it might seem like a menacing issue, especially now during COVID, but it begins with those small things, you know, reaching out to your pantry, donating food you don't need. Yeah, and even starting your own thing or your own initiative. If you want to run a food drive, then yeah, that's something. So just a point on exigence or urgency, the issue is actually now doubled for all the statistics you just saw, and it's even more intense. So this is where we come in as good neighbors, to just take those measures to really try as much as we can do to help out. So I'll brush through resources, and so that we don't just talk at you, I will open up the floor for questions and insights from people. So in terms of resources, again, a lot of food insecurity resources are classified as underutilized, in the sense that people just don't know about them. An issue we worked out with the pantry recently was that no one knew where the campus pantry was at UMD. So that's an issue that's being addressed by the pantry themselves, which we brought to their attention. But if you look at government resources, there's SNAP benefits, which I think require heavy research per se, in the sense that information is usually misleading. No one knows how they might qualify for SNAP benefits. People don't know how they qualify. So just a shout out to UMD, because now there's a work group which is really putting a lot of money and resources into creating a visible space for the UMD campus pantry. So that's something great happening on campus. So those are a list of government resources. High schools and middle schools usually have lunch resources. And then for local resources, so this is what I would look at as an ally in terms of, even after this, to just engage and do something. Food pantries, soup kitchens. If you look at county resources, counties take donations and things of that sort. And there's also UMD resources for people in College Park or nearby. There's the campus pantry, which I just mentioned. Dr. Wang talked about getting grants for that. I think it was like $1 million for next steps and the next phase of her research. There's the counseling office, there's the emergency meal fund, the student crisis fund. And if you know someone who's food insecure or would like to direct people to these resources, you can always reach out to either Ayanna and I, because this is also not an exhaustive list for this presentation. And then Zero Hunger has a food resource list, which I believe the pantry said might be useful for the school. If you also need access to that, just reach out and let us know. And I think it's a good way to, just learn and practice in terms of food drives and familiarizing yourself with food insecurity resources, what databases to go on to test, to look at statistics. And Sarah, I see you in the chat. Yes, we will send that link. And if you don't mind the resource list. And then this is the hunger hotline. It's 1-8663-HUNGRY. That's the time when it operates. But I would say all these resources we sort of presented are not exhaustive at all. But if you look at them closely, it's a very good way of familiarizing yourself with what's working at the moment in terms of intervention on food insecurity. What are the missing questions and insights? What assessments have been made? As you heard, it's not something you can just see, clearly on someone. It's something which requires a great deal of care from an ally and, just being cognizant of stigma, most importantly. So that's the length of our presentation. Hopefully an introduction for future work and collaborations with people on the call, and future insights and, more work. It doesn't stop here, as I'm sure we all know. But now we'll open it up to just questions, concerns, things you noticed, things we might have missed. Or just comments.
I'm also going to drop the link to the resource list in the chat now, just so you guys have access to it.
And while we wait for a question, just to emphasize this point. So if I would take away anything from today, it would be the issue is complex, but complex not for the purposes of being overwhelmed, but complex for the purposes of being very precise and helping the people who actually need the help with whatever it is they need. So yeah, stigma is a big thing here.
Yeah, I see in the chat that Cameron asked if we've partnered with other organizations. Yes, we have. We actually have partnered with Beyond Shelter, which is a homelessness group on campus. We've partnered with Hala for Hunger, which we actually have an event coming up with them soon. And we've also talked to SGA about these relevant issues. And as Buckley had mentioned, there's a hunger-free work group on campus, which we are a coalition group a part of. So yeah, we have been collaborating with other groups because that's very important.
And I would also like to emphasize, so the work group is very important because Dr. Wang said that the work group needs a lot of student insights. So if you look that up, Hunger-Free UMD work group, that gives all the updates of what, the pantry is doing and where the school is headed, on an institutional level in terms of really addressing this issue. And since we talked about COVID and the numbers being doubled, right now it's less of the educational component, which is important, but more resources to people. That's like the major thing. And I see someone says, I'm not sure if you answered this question, but how would you go about volunteering with UMD Zero Hunger? Okay, so we try to make our meetings in Zero Hunger dynamic in the sense that it's not just meetings where we just talk at you and give you information. So the way they're structured is that we begin with just, updates on what's going on relative to the issue we're trying to address. And then we do workshopping in every meeting. So workshopping can be making resource lists or reaching out to people and coalitions or planning a food drive, which we're doing right now. So we're planning a November food drive. So if volunteering looks a lot like doing that type of stuff internally within the campaign or working with the campus pantry. So we have a lot of opportunities through collaboration. So the campus pantry is recruiting people through Zero Hunger if you're interested to volunteer every Friday. Turp Farm is also an opportunity. Also other organizations we coalition build with, for example, Feed UMD. So Feed UMD is a very data and statistics driven coalition on campus, which addresses the issue from, just stats and working with council members, etc. So to answer your question, Christina, volunteer opportunities look like that. So you can either help with something for the campaign, or if there's a coalition we're working with, which you find interesting, then you can inquire with that from that angle and work through them. And we also have positions in our campaigns, so we can make positions relevant to what we're trying to work on. So a research position, social media position, and if people, so again, since we try to make it people oriented, if our members or anyone sees that there's something missing, hey, there's this position which might elevate the message and reach people quicker, that's the type of volunteering we do. So it's very dynamic and it's very people centered, because again, the main goal is to just hear what people need and then deliver it to the people as best as we can in a communal effort. So yeah, no problem. And again, yes, our meetings are Wednesdays, 5 to 6. If anyone is interested, again, you can either email us or drop your email down below to engage. Yeah, so I'll still leave it open for more questions if anyone else has questions, comments, concerns. All right, so yeah, so just in respect of people's time, I see that our time is up. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for listening. Again, hopefully this is just an entry point for you into the issue. And hopefully in the future, you can reach out and ask for the resources and reference points we're using. If you wanna volunteer, that would be great. And if you also come across something which you think might be useful for the campaign, and since it's not for the campaign, it's for the people, just send it our way. That would be useful, because again, this is very much a communal. It's not just a Zero Hunger thing, it's just a communal issue. Yeah, so thank you everyone. Thanks for coming, and just reach out and inquire for details, or even just keeping up with what we're doing. Yeah, thank you.